And welcome to another conversation at the table. I am Chad Bresson. I'm pastor at the table of Los Fresnos. So glad you are with us on this Monday, June the 1st, first day of June. Hard to believe. We got more rain today. In fact, it may rain again while we're here. We should be glad about all the rain, though. I think we're all glad that it's not as dry as it was. We got some green grass. The yard is very, very green right now. And so we need the grass to grow. In fact, it looked like some of the stuff that I planted doesn't look like it's coming up as fast as I want it to, but it should start taking off here soon. It's a work in progress. Well, glad you're with us. Glad you are joining us here for this conversation at the table. It was a big weekend for us as a family. Luke graduated. He is finally out of high school. And he deserved it. He worked hard. I'm so proud of my kids. I'm proud of Noel. I'm proud of Luke. As somebody pinched me, it all happened way too fast. And when they say, don't blink, don't blink. If you've got kids in elementary, middle school, even early high school, it'll be over before you know it. And then you'll be wondering what happened. And that's exactly what has happened to me. I can't believe it. Tell your kids that you love them often. Love them unconditionally because they need it. It's going to go by way too fast. Many thanks to all those that made the weekend memorable. Thank you, Martine and Anna, for adopting Luke on the fly and showing up. That was a cool surprise. Thank you, Los Fresnos School District. The LFCISD pulled off a great feat on Saturday evening. Live graduation. Unbelievable. A couple months ago, thought it wasn't going to happen, and then it did. So hats off to all those who were able to make it possible in the stadium. And again, LFCISD is actually now a model for the rest of us who are following in their steps in terms of holding live events, things that can be done. And that's what's happening this weekend to the table. The table is going to be at the Los Fresnos Community Center. We're going to be meeting 10:30 Sunday morning. It'll be our first worship experience together since March. I am absolutely excited, looking forward to that. Already making plans. We got some things in store. We're going to make sure we're socially distant. We're going to make sure we're safe. We're going to make sure that you feel safe. But we're going to gather and we're going to worship. We're going to have communion. We're going to have a Bible talk. And we're going to hum along behind our Mass. We'll have some music. So I encourage you, if you have a chance, if you're not going to be anywhere, 10:30 Sunday at the Los Fresnos Community Center, join us at the table. We are in 2020. And 2020, if there's a theme for 2020, it's loving your neighbor. We've been talking about loving your neighbor through COVID-19. That's why we do the social distancing, and that's why we wear the masks. But loving your neighbor has become an overarching theme for 2020, and that couldn't be more apparent in what's been taking place over the past few days around the country. Loving our neighbor is something we have to remind ourselves, and as we grapple and as the country grapples with the death of George Floyd. And when we bring up his name, immediately everybody in the room goes to one side or the other. It really shouldn't be that way. But that's what happens. You mention racism, you mention injustice, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a feeling. It's one of those topics that makes us feel uncomfortable. It's a topic that I feel uncomfortable. If anything, the moment I broach it right here is the moment, again, people are going to be polarized one way or going one way or the other when you mention these topics, when you mention George Floyd. It's a subject that is loaded with landmines. Even in the church, there's no easy way to say anything, and once you say something, immediately there is a flashback. It all comes right back at you, and it doesn't matter what you've said. I've seen that already today 2 or 3 times, where somebody was attempting to make some sort of statement about how they felt, and immediately the comments started flowing in from one side or the other. And again, so landmines, even cliches. That's why people resort to cliches, because they feel like, hey, if I say a cliche, then we're not going to, nobody's going to have an issue with that, and Wouldn't you know it, in this environment, even cliches aren't working. Donovan Riley had a great article over at 1517 today. I encourage you to go over to 1517.org and check out his article. And his article had a lot of good things in it, helping us think through the racism, the injustice, the things that are going on in our country as a result of what happened with George Floyd. Among the things that Donovan had to say, here's what I want to look at for just a couple of minutes. Donovan had this to say: there's a time for justice, there's a time for love. But love must always have the final word. Jesus must have the final word, because Jesus is God and God is love. We will never overcome what divides us, never heal the wounds that are opened by injustice, never embrace each other as brothers and sisters in Christ until we embrace love. God's love has redemptive power. And then we say to the people, and these are Donovan's words, say to the people you're prone to hate, I love you. I would rather die than hate you. I would rather die than hate you. Who's on my list? Who's on your list when we say that? You know, we find it impossible to love somebody without conditions. And we all have our conditions. Those conditions are called biases. You know, we qualify everything. I absolutely hate Twitter these days. I read it because I want to keep up with what's going on. But good grief. Is it all that hard to talk about the racism and injustice of George Floyd and just leave it there? Is that possible? Is it all that hard to talk about George Floyd without bringing up all the people who lost property this weekend? As bad as that was. Can we do that as a church? Can we talk about racism and injustice without talking about all the stuff that happens as a result of it? Why does every conversation have to be qualified? Why does every time somebody says something about George Floyd, it has to be qualified? Why are there always landmines? Landmines that we all set up. You know, we all got our triggers. I've got triggers too. I'll admit it. I've got my own biases. I've got my own triggers. I'm totally white. I get that. And I don't have to go, I don't have to go 10 feet to be reminded of that. I spent some time here in the lower Rio Grande Valley as a substitute teacher. And those middle schoolers never had a problem reminding me. I love them. They're great. They were great. They never had a problem reminding me about how white I am. And they did. I love our kids here. It's why I love living here. Our kids are great. They tell it like it is. I'm white. I'm also a sinner. I'm also a pastor. I'm also someone who speaks gospel. Before we run to all the pithy statements and before we start hiding between all our systemic reactions when things like this weekend and this past week happen, before we allow all of our problems to die the death of 1,000 qualifications, can we embrace God's love without qualifications? Can we say that racism and injustice against African Americans is evil and leave it at that without any qualifications? Can we say that? Without a but that comes at the end. Can we say can we say that first part of the sentence, that racism and injustice against African Americans is evil, without comma but? That's the gospel. That's the gospel. Can we say what happened to George Floyd was wrong without any qualifications? Without that comma and then a but? I would rather die than hate you. You know, those are the words of Donovan Riley, but they might as well have been spoken by Jesus. That was Jesus. That's Jesus. Jesus moved toward people that were not like him. In fact, he was always moving toward people that were unlovely and totally unlike him. They're human. That's me and you. You know, we are God haters. That's who we are as sinners. We are Jesus haters. We smell human. We smell human. we smell like sin. And you know what? Jesus was moving toward us anyways. Jesus loved us anyways. And so when we smell like human, when we smell like sin, you know what Jesus says? I would rather die than hate you. I'd rather die than hate you. Matthew 9 says, and again, this is related to what we're talking about here. Matthew 9, when Jesus saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected like sheep without a shepherd. He felt compassion for people who were unlovely, who smelled like humans, who smelled like sinners. He had compassion because they were distressed and dejected like sheep without a shepherd. Until we have that kind of compassion, until we embrace the gospel in faith for all of life, including our biases, until we embrace the gospel for all of it, until we embrace how much forgiveness that we have been given, until we embrace how much forgiveness that we have been given, and how much love we have been forgiven, and view our neighbor through that lens, we're going to continue to have a racism problem. It's not enough to simply grant our neighbor equality or equal access. It's not what the gospel calls us to. Well, it's part of it. The gospel calls us to proactively love that person, the person who's not like us, to go to them, to be moving toward them. Not simply responding to them, but moving toward them. That's love. The gospel changes us. The gospel shows us what love is. And the gospel is love for us. Jesus loved. I mean, that's what John says. We love because he first loved us. So the church is not in a position to simply tolerate, not simply create equal access. The church is called to love. Now, love is the law. We can't do that. We can't do that on our own. We have to have Jesus loving us first, forgiving us first, so that we can do this. Once we embrace that, though, now we are in a position to love our neighbor. I would rather die than hate you. Donovan's words come right out of Jesus' mouth. He died for us when all we were given him was hate. He died for us rather than hating us, in order that we could love like he does. And that's the only way that we can love like he does, is for him to do that for us. And then for us to constantly and be always embracing his forgiveness for us. So let's start there. Let's start the conversation there. There's no way to have this conversation without there being another conversation and something else going on. But let's start there. Let's start with the gospel. Let's start with what Jesus has done for us. And then as a result of that, then remind ourselves and be speaking. I would rather die than hate you. So let's start the conversation there without the triggers, without the qualifications. Let's start there. We love because Jesus first loved us. That's today's conversation at the table. This week at the table, Wednesday evening, we're going to have, actually Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 7 o'clock, we're going to have more eyewitness devotions from the book of Acts. Actually, it's just going to be Tuesday and Wednesday this week because we're wrapping it up. Hard to believe, but yeah, that's coming to an end. Then on Thursday, a LAMP Zoom Bible study, we're looking at 1 Kings 19. I encourage you, spend some of your lunch hour or all of your lunch hour with us on Zoom. We'll be doing that at noon on Zoom. And then Sunday, for the first time since March, we're meeting at the Los Fresnos Community Center as the table. So I encourage you, if you, again, don't have anything to do on Sunday, visit with us, gather with us, 10:30 Sunday, Los Fresnos Community Center. So leave your comments here. I want to hear your comments. I know today's things got a lot of landmines, but leave your comments, leave your prayer requests, let us know what's going on in your life. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay at home as much as possible, and stay connected. Remember, we are loved by Jesus for the love of Los Fresnos. Have a great Monday evening.